The Shift is brought to you by SE Healthcare. Welcome to The Shift. I'm Dr. Andrea Coyle. Welcome back to the next episode of the Shift podcast. Today's podcast is going to be a little different. I'm going to share an up close and personal story of Isaac Hodges. It's an interesting story how we met. There was someone on LinkedIn who was seeking work. And I called the hospital where this individual worked and asked for the CNO. And the CNO happened to be Isaac. It was just this fluky thing. It wasn't even who I was looking for. So I believe, Isaac, that our meeting was meant to be because I started talking about the Shift podcast. You started telling me your story. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is a topic that will resonate in nursing. So, Shifties, welcome to Isaac Hodges, the CNO and COO of Curry Health Network. Isaac, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that welcome invite, and I definitely agree with you. When we actually got to sit down and talk, it was a very refreshing discussion, and a lot of our own lives lined up rather serendipitously, and that's not always the case. So I don't disagree with you. It was more than just a chance meeting.
I agree with that. And that's really part of the podcast is to create this community of nurses and healthcare professionals. And when we started talking, your story really made sense to me because I was on the other side of your story. So, Isaac, if you wouldn't mind, tell the Shifties a little bit about your story, just the way you told me the story.
Yeah, it's always hard where to start, right? But to your point, currently I am the chief nursing officer and chief operations officer for our Curry Health Network. I've worked here now. I believe I'm in my 17th year. I started out here as a new grad. I worked in acute care, as most do. Got my feet wet there, and over a fairly quick period of time, found my way to the emergency department and really found my groove there as a nurse. And that's where I did most of my frontline nursing is in the emergency department. I was there a number of years. Over that time, our little health network has expanded, and I've been a part of that. I've been grateful to be a part of that. In that expansion, at a certain point, I was asked to become a part of um, a standalone surgery center and actually sort of oversee that. Prior to my time in nursing, I was in private business, ran a private business for over a decade. So uh, a certain provider got wind of that who was opening the surgery center and knew I was a nurse, but also had business management skills. And so I stepped alongside my emergency department shifts, which I still covered. I stepped into the world of surgery, in outpatient surgery in a surgery center. I did that for a number of years. Well, I shouldn't say too long, probably 3 years. And then from there, the health network actually took it over, and the surgeries they were doing were a lot more than what I was used to. More, it was out of my expertise for sure. They were looking at doing orthopedics and some other things. So they brought in a manager of surgery that really had worked in surgery and had a lot of experience in those areas. And then I just stepped directly back into emergency department at that point, and stepped away from the surgery center. So that's pretty much my nursing up to that point. That was about 2014, 15 ish, whatever. But meantime, in that chain of events, I also developed a drug habit. So became dependent on narcotics. The whole story of dependence, I'm always weary of saying it because sometimes it sounds like you're making excuses or justifying your actions, and I'm the first to own mine, so I don't want this to come across that way at all. But it's definitely my story. So years earlier, I had a knee surgery, and I had some I don't even remember. I'm going to guess Percocet or something that was given to me for recovery, and I never used it, never needed to. Um, but as I went to actually nursing school, believe it or not, our house burned down. And when our house burned down, I was a caregiver. We had an adult care home. That was my private business. So with the house burning down, I had to find another occupation while we rebuilt. And by the way, everyone was safe. No one got injured in the fire, but the building was pretty much a complete loss. So that year, when I was working outside of adult care, I was helping rebuild decks, doing some manual labor. Got pretty sore, had that bottle of pills, and started taking them at that point. And actually, they made me feel pretty good. So I went on that route for a while. I went to nursing school. I wouldn't have considered myself an addict at that point, but definitely had this bottle of pills I would take every once in a while. It was a big bottle when needed, and other odds and ends happened. I had dental procedures and things like that where I got more narcotic pain meds, and I developed a taste for it over some time, quite some time. Um, that really parlayed into about 2015, 16, where I had an acquaintance who was also a vet who had a whole load of narcotic medications, and most of which he said he was allergic to, he couldn't take. And he asked at that point again, like I said, I was a nurse by then, if I could get rid of them for him, and I was more than happy to. Obviously, that was to add to my own stash, not to take to any type of waste facility. The drug addiction at that point had developed to where that once that stash run out, I couldn't just stop. So I kept going to this person who had certain narcotics that he still took in large, he had large quantities of that he wasn't allergic to. Those I started stealing once I ran out of that free stash. And that ultimately led to my arrest. And 2016, I was arrested for drug theft and ended up, in front of a judge as well as reported to the Oregon State Board of Nursing. I don't know if you have any specific questions in there. I jumped around a little bit. I apologize, but that's a quick summary of what happened.
No, Isaac, that you nailed it. And so I am just going to share one thing. If you recall, when I first reached out to you, probably the third phone call, because we were playing phone tag for a little bit, you were like, so tell me again why you're reaching out to me. And then that's how we broke the ice and started talking about your story. And and now I'm listening as I'm hearing the story again. And now I'm thinking to myself, why you were a little ambivalent when you heard me reach out to you randomly. You probably thought I was trying to dig into your past or something.
Well, and I'm really open about it. I usually don't go into this whole background necessarily, but I mean I have a lot of staff and my record is out there. There's more we'll get into that will I'm sure that will tell you guys why my record gets brought up again and again in more of the political realm. But so it's not anything I hide, and nor do I try to. But I am always a little bit wondering, okay, if it's a board of nursing or if it's something related to my history, I know I'm going to be discussing that. More than happy to. But if it's about work, in the other areas that I'm very focused in, I think this history is very pertinent and I hope it helps a lot of people. But it also isn't a scarlet letter that I necessarily wear around every day when I go in and out. And in my experience, especially with my core staff here who know this story, um, I think it's led to us developing deeper relationships, truly, and I've actually been able to, I believe, help a few people in the process. So yeah, I definitely am wondering what people are wanting to know, but I'm always more than happy to talk about it.
And Isaac, that's why I thought after we had spoke the second time, I think you're spot on. I think there are people out there that they're going to hear this story and they're going to say, "Oh, I think that's one of my coworkers, or oh, that sounds like me. How can I get help? Um, what can I do? And so my one question before you go more into the story, um, when you realized you had a problem, obviously you got arrested. What did your state board of nursing, are there programs in the state board of nursing? I know there's something called alternative to discipline peer assistance programs, but I'm not quite sure they're in every state.
Yeah, I don't know that they are, but I did learn that Oregon has that. Definitely after it was too late for me, when I learned about that. And I wouldn't tell you, I can't sit here and tell you that I would have used it anyways. I was really into justifying my own actions and sort of that's not me. And I think a lot of people are that way. So for me, I had these sort of standards I had set up. One of them was, well, I'm not going to, use drugs at work type thing. Well, obviously, if I'm using drugs afterwards or they're still in my system, they're in my system at work. But in my head, I'm not one of those people that uses drugs at work. That was what I would tell myself. As ridiculous as that sounds, it's not like that stuff just gets out of your system, anyways. And over time, that gray area got more and more blurred, but I really did, and I think a lot of addicts will do that. They just put in their heads these sort of justifications that they're not as bad as they really are. So I probably needed that, like full on arrest, like the end of the game right now, um, for me to really see how bad it was. But yes, there are if people can see through the truth of their addiction, there are areas that they can reach out for help, and I believe those are beneficial.
And a couple of them are state boards that have these alternative to discipline peer assistance programs. There's another one just for the shifties that are interested, nurses in recovery. Um, and obviously, hospitals have their employee assistant programs. And the American Association of Psychiatric Nurses, I'm sure. NAMI is another thing another organization you can reach out to. I'm just trying to throw some resources out there. Um, Isaac, do you feel like when you were going through this, do you feel like any of your peers had any idea?
No one really came up to me and said that, but there's an investigation that takes place by the Oregon Board of Nursing, and I ended up eventually getting a lawyer. I mean, to be quite honest, I was ready to let my license go. I was just, I thought it was the end of the world. I just relinquished myself to that. I was going to work as long as I could till it caught up with me, type of a thing. And so that was where my first mindset was. But once I got a lawyer and realized, no, we can fight to keep your license. There are certain things we can do, and I started to see, a little bit of light in those in that area. um, I got Part of that is I got privy to the state's investigation and what they had looked into and who they had asked questions of, which was pretty much all my coworkers. I didn't even know that. I knew that one or two had been questioned, but I hadn't realized the depth of investigation that they do, and they're really key on tying your drug use to work. That is one of their main focuses, which is fair, but but in this case, I did get to see some of the interviews they had and what people said about me, um, and it was pretty eye opening. So a few people, I would say, did have some notions, but what they said about me was lies and untruth. And what was really hard is, at least on two people specifically, I guess, not everybody, but on those two specifically, I ended up having to work with them for years afterwards, and it was actually they were my direct report in some occasions, and I never held it against them. I never said anything, but um, they did tie a lot of what they thought was probably from that drug use onto accusations against me that really were not true, and so that was a little frustrating. But I put myself in that position, right? So I get why they thought that way.
You know, in my career, I worked night shift in a ICU, adult ICU, and we had a male nurse who was diverting, and we never had any suspicion until we found out that he was diverting, and then we put the pieces together. So I think that's what's there might be a huge opportunity, and not to cover in this particular podcast, Isaac, but there might be more opportunities than we even ever considered to help educate nurses in that care delivery environment and in the leader environment as well. But what are some of the signs and symptoms and behaviors? I had a nurse that worked on a med surg unit with me years ago, and she got caught diverting. Uh, we all knew, like was so, her behavior was so obvious. Um, Long lunch breaks. I have to run to my car. I forgot lunch, and then she'd come back like an hour later. Um, Frequent cigarette breaks, late for work all the time, a lot of sick calls, erratic behavior at work. So we knew, we put that one together, but the other gentleman that we worked with, we had no idea.
There's no doubt in my mind I would have been that person. And maybe I was to a certain extent already, in the view of, like I said, in some of the interviews that I later saw. Um, so I don't take anything away from that. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that, yeah, I mean, I'm sure there was times when I acted extremely abnormal, but yeah, I probably put on a pretty good show. I mean, at the end of the day, for most people.
And if you would not have got caught, you could have escalated into different behaviors. So maybe it was a blessing that you were caught early.
And they kept trying to, the board kept trying to really dig into more of my past and my history, leading up to that. But I don't, I didn't have a whole lot of that past and history until, I developed a taste, if you will. But I didn't really lose control until maybe I'm just put a time frame up there about a year before I got arrested. Then I was definitely way out of control, way more than I ever had been before.
And so let's switch gears a little bit, or let's shift gears a little bit and talk to me and talk to the shifties. How, after you got arrested, did your license get suspended?
So after I got arrested, I just, was more of a bury my head in the sand and just see whatever happens, happens. So I just kept my nose to the grindstone and for a while kept thinking things would maybe get kicked under the carpet or, I don't know, but obviously that doesn't happen. And, so eventually, I had my arrest, I had to go to court. They did what's called a diverted sentence. So as long as I was good for a year through the court system, they basically you didn't have to plead guilty. And so that's what happened. But during that time, the Oregon board was watching this and then sent a letter saying, "Hey, we know this has happened. You've got this arrest." I didn't report myself, which was number one, a big issue. And I take that back. I did ultimately report myself, but it was late. Like it was later. So then they had sent me a letter. Basically, we're going to be reviewing this and then going to be removing your license. And that was when I basically had said, okay, it is what it is. Um, During that time, of course, I've had my court date. The court has mandated my sentence, and I have, the urine test, which can be, whenever they just call you, and you've got to do that within a certain amount of time. So they're all random. I have court mandated therapy sessions and classes to take, and all of that sort of goes along with it. And of course, you have to meet all those. You have a parole officer that sort of oversees and makes sure you're doing all that and meeting all those requirements. And so that piece was all going on at the same time as I start dealing with the board. That's when a couple, probably a month, or so goes by, a couple weeks to a month. One of another nurse who has had some issues historically that I probably should have reached out to, but that I didn't, heard that I was in this trouble, and he said, "You need to get a lawyer." I'm like, "Why? I'm already going to be losing my license." And anyways, he said, "No, you really need to. You might not." So I did at that point. To his credit, he gave me some names. I reached out to a lawyer, found out that it wasn't necessarily the end of the world, but there was a lot of work to do. And then at that point, I started working between my lawyer and the state board of nursing. And at that point, the lawyer got back to me and he said, essentially, I've made an agreement. The agreement is you can continue to work as long as you don't work anywhere where there's narcotics around and you have no access to it. And you have another nurse that will sign off on your oversight for every shift you work. And my CNO at the time, for whatever reason, was the sweetest person in the world and agreed to do that. I'm very thankful for her to that. So she was my oversight. And then I was transitioned to an urgent care that didn't have controlled substances. And in addition to that, I did meet all of the court required classes and everything. So I was able to stay in that position while the state board of nursing continued to review my case and do their investigation.
Wow. And I have to give kudos to your chief nursing officer who really believed in you. She took a leap of faith, truly.
You know, as I told you, this network, I've worked here 17 years. So if you do the math, this all happened while I was still working in the same place I'm working now.
Right.
They did. They for whatever reason, they saw that I could get through this, and I'm eternally grateful for that. And a lot of my team did as well. Um, as far as nursing practice goes, outside of that, I was a pretty proficient nurse. So maybe it was that piece of it where they saw, hey, if he can get through this addiction, he's salvageable. I don't know. But I am grateful for that. And the fact of the matter was that that arrest was it was so impactful. And we haven't really talked about that, but um, the classes and all the other things I had to do for addiction were really secondary. I I really stopped all those drugs because of and the thievery and all that came along with that because of the impact of that arrest and the fact that I had let so many people down. That is truly the accountability of that was truly what was the straw that broke the addictive camel's back for sure.
And, when you talk about the accountability, I'm sure you'd mentioned you live in a small town and it's the shame that comes with it. And shame is a difficult emotion. And, you know,
Necessary though, very necessary, and I'm glad that I had all of it. But you're right, we are in a very small area. My name was in the newspaper. Ultimately, my story was somewhat in there, but obviously you could look it up on the Board of Nursing's site, so that it wasn't anything that could be hidden. So all of that though was, I believe, necessary components. And the reason that I was talking about that, I think, was because of my coworkers and stuff. I know had a magnifying glass over me as I was working through this, um, but they didn't see anything because the impact of that arrest was so much that I thankfully was able to probably go through an addiction that makes most people, takes them to the end of their life. Unfortunately, some of the drugs that were in that freebie of drugs that I'd received to throw away were hardcore. I'm talking fentanyl packets that were the old gel that you could just cut and get the gel out of. I mean, hardcore drugs. So the fact that I wasn't in a gutter somewhere is a miracle. So after this arrest and everything, people working with me, I think I probably was under magnifying glass, but I was bound and determined not to do any of that.
wow. It's almost like when people hit rock bottom, they either stay rock bottom or they catapult. And that's where the story gets even better.
It was rough. It was rock bottom for sure. For me, it was. The night I was arrested, I think I told you this. I had a ever so small voice in my head say, "If you don't take accountability for all this right now, tonight, you're done." And so I actually, my two oldest children, my wife, my dad, um, pastor from our church, um, oh, and the arresting officer, I called all back to my house. We sat around our dining room table that night, and I laid it all out. I knew I had to, but that shame is heavy. It was a relief, oddly enough, to say, to get it all out was nice, but it was a lot of shame. And and it was so heavy that I could tell even the arresting officer was sort of nervous being there, and he sort of made a few comments like, "Hey, this happens, people get stuck in this type of addiction from pills all the time. This isn't the end of the world." And he kept sort of making light of it a little bit, and I kept bringing even him back in and saying, "No, this is me. I am this addict, and these people are my closest. This is my family. They need to know who I really am, because they haven't for probably well over a year or two, or even longer." So, but I knew I had to do that in order to be accountable, and so that was the first step. That night was the first step, and a lot of shame and guilt. A lot of that was before even the court date, right? That was before even the classes I had to take and all of that. That was before I ever dealt with the state board of nursing. So it was very low, very low.
You said something. In order to shift or change, you have to accept. And that's really what you're just describing. You had to accept that you screwed up, you had a problem, and in the absence of being able to accept that, you would never be able to make the shift or change. And you were
I
able
don't
to
think
do
so.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you were able to do that with a great support system. And so how many years did you have to practice with oversight?
So the and if you've never dealt with a nursing board, or I'm sure other boards the same way, uh, they're they're not easy. So they, I'm sure, tactfully waited till that full year of my court mandated time was done before they ever decided to make an agreement with me. And I had that full year of negative urine tests and classes and meeting all this that I could show them, which I totally get. And then my lawyer, doing what lawyers do in the background, sending him lots of money. But through all of that, about a month after my parole, my legal part was all completed and done. They came with an agreement through my lawyer to now be under their parole, if you will, for another 2 years. So in total, it was just over 3 years of direct oversight, classes, random urines, all that stuff. And my CNO of that time had to sign again with the board of nursing. Not well, she had before, so she continued that with this new agreement with the board of nursing to do my oversight and write them. I don't even remember how often she had to write letters, but it was fairly frequently, and she didn't have to do any of that. So to your point, a lot of good people helped me get through it for sure. A great support system. The organization didn't have to, and they like I said, they had their magnifying glass out as well, no doubt about it. But thankfully, miraculously, I was clean and free of that habit and being able to work.
And so after that, how did you get approached to step into the CNO role?
Yeah, let's see, about 2 years later, I'm still working down, in a department that doesn't have controlled substances, and doing what I can there, showing up and working and trying to, again, prove myself. And I was approached to help start a new line of service. Again, I have a business background and I have some team building backgrounds and stuff like that. So I agreed. The new line of service was cardiology services. I had to, of course, tell the state. State had to agree to it, and it couldn't be controlled substances and all of that. There wasn't. It was more clinical. So then I moved into that role. I'd say a number of months went by. We successfully implemented our new cardiology services, and then um, we needed some help in a couple other departments. So I was asked if I would step into the be a director of ancillary services, outpatient services, actually. And I agreed to that, and the state again agreed to allow me to do that. So over time, even though I am being watched clearly by the state and having to take off and do random urines and go to these classes at weird times. And by the way, we live in a very rural area, so sometimes my random urine couldn't be done here. Sometimes I had to drive 60 miles, and I forget the time, but very limited time frame to do it. So um, they really worked with me to get through this, and I'm very eternally appreciative. But so I continued to get more and more duties assigned to me, more on the leadership end of things. Right. I left out also that back in the 13, 14 time, I went back to nursing school and got my bachelor's. So I had my BSN through OHSU here in Oregon. Um, and then as I continued through these leadership transitions, I ended up going back for a master's degree, and I stepped aside from nursing and just strictly leadership. So I received my master's in organizational leadership as well in that time frame. But but yeah, just continued to sort of inherit some more responsibilities, and then our CNO, who was the one that really had worked with me to get through all of my issues, she ended up leaving, and we had a couple different CNOs come in and out. At that point, I had actually become COO. So I was operations officer for the network and had worked alongside of our diagnostic imaging department, our laboratory services, therapies, even dietary, which I really enjoyed. We had a great time. We built some really good programs. Our network has been expanding this whole time. Just a great network, a great place to be. And so I was very fortunate to be a part of all that. But about three CNOs or four CNOs later, after our primary one had left, I had a good discussion with our CEO about, we just keep going through CNOs, and, what do you think about maybe sharing that role? Because I didn't want to give up operations. I loved it. So we sort of figured out how that might work. I had some help with an assistant, and we figured out some logistics. And yeah, so about 2 years ago, I inherited the CNO as well and became the CNO/COO for Curry Health Network.
What a great story. What a great role. The power of community, the power of belief, and your community really rallied around you that then shifted you into something else.
Yeah, the life is an adventure. I'll tell you that.
It is. Your
Um,
life is an adventure.
so yeah, so hmm, about 4 years ago. So all this still is going on, and by 4 years ago, the state board oversight, all that has been done for a couple of years at that point, and or more. And I'm sort of, in my position at the time in the health network as operations officer, and one of our local um, city councilors asked me if I would be willing to run for city council. And I said immediately no. And by the way, that was also during my master's program. So there was a lot on my plate. And I said, no, I really wouldn't. Well, that goes along. And about November, the elections happen. And it turns out another city councilor actually was elected to a county commissioner position. So it opened up another city council position. So then I was asked by another city councilor if I would fill a position, if I would just be appointed. So I wouldn't have to run. I could be appointed, and again, I'm always very open about my history, and in those positions, I'm like, you probably don't want to appoint me. Here's my history. This
Right.
anytime something happens, it gets drugged through the paper, and I say that because like when I went to start the cardiology practice, news got wind of that, and they said, "Oh, look at this nurse and his history, and he's leading the cardiology practice." And then I had a couple other transitions where people came and they brought my history up, and so I had been through the press a number of times at this point, and I had told this other counselor, I said, "I'm okay with it, but you guys need to know." And they were, "No, that's not a problem. We think your experience will help." I'm like, okay. So I had been in school enough to know I could probably handle it. Um, so I was appointed to the Brookings City Council, and then about 2 months into that, uh, we are as counselors are asked to re-sign a contract with our city manager. Now, our city manager had unfortunately the previous summer been arrested herself for theft. And this was unlike mine, drug theft. Hers was stealing out of a local store, and it was a very minimal amount. And I'm always one to say I need to be curious. As a world, we all need to be more curious. Ask questions, just don't assume, please. So that's the way I really look at leadership. That's the way I really look at these situations where someone's been arrested. Okay, let me hear their side. I want to know more about it. I was able to a little bit, but the council, aside from me, really pushed forward this contract to re-sign this city manager and put her back into her role. And I just really thought I can't just do this. I need to know more. And so in my little bit of leeway I was given to look into things and find out more information, what I found was what happened with me didn't happen with her. There was no accountability. There was no, I shouldn't say no, but there wasn't any that I really got to see. There wasn't really even a lot of the shame, that I think is helpful in these situations that was had. It was more like, oh, it was an accident. Oh, it was nothing. And I basically turned around and said, I can't support this contract. I don't think that her ways have changed. And in that, I found out, and all of us did, that there was like 15 other surveillance videos of theft that had been occurring over the past year. And I truly think that she had a problem, that it was her sort of way of
Mhm.
getting high, was just getting away with, because it was never anything big. It was never these huge amounts, but it was time after time after time. And it was so much that way that the owner of the store, I got to talk to him, and he's like, it was petty stuff that we really didn't make a big deal of. But at this point, 15 times, like, we're making a big deal of this. We're pushing this to court, even though the total dollar amount was so small. And so I just couldn't sign it, and I even tried, hey, can we put forth sort of a some sort of a program where it shows that she's getting help, that because everyone I think is redeemable, I hope. And no, we're just going to resign. So anyways, that's a public vote, right? And they voted to resign, and boy, the public didn't really like that, and a recall ended up occurring, and that caused a lot of commotion. The recall took a while because the elections had just happened, and some of the people that had just been elected, they wanted to recall, and you can't recall them right away. And so this was a drawn out thing. But when all of that was said and done, three of the five, so you have the mayor and four city council people, three of them were recalled. Only two were left, me and another counselor who, by the way, changed his vote to match mine to a no. So we were the two that weren't recalled. So out of that, there needed to be a mayor. And I didn't want to be mayor, but he didn't want to be mayor. And it went back and forth. But over time, I ended up becoming mayor of Brookings. And and then we had a lot of rebuilding to do. So over time, and I still feel really bad because I'm a family friend and a lifelong friend, and I still am a friend of our old city manager, but we had to let her go, and we hired a new city manager, and I think the old city manager, I think, is doing well, and I wish her all the best. But it just, the political side of things and the public outcry and everything, it just really gotten to a point that it wasn't even fair for her to stay in that position. And so we ended up getting a new city council seated through a public sort of input phase. and then hiring a new city manager. Our police chief was able to step in as the interim for about 6 months while we did that, and we rebuilt. But when all said and done, yeah, I was the mayor of Brookings up until about 2 weeks, 3 weeks ago.
That's so your whole story goes, there's a couple points to your story. Number one, there's a lot of shifts. Number two, never give up. Number three, the power of belief in community. Um, the nurses make the impossible possible. Nurses should rule the world because, like, you're a nurse mayor. I don't know how many nurse mayors there are in the country, but you're one of them. I'm sure there's not that many.
I don't know how many, and I'll finish that too. The 2 week ago thing. The reason that I stepped down as the mayor 2 weeks ago is just because we moved my wife, so we have one child left at home, and my wife and myself, and we moved out of the city limits. So we still live in the general area, but we're no longer in the city limits. So part of the requirement of being the mayor is living in the city limits. So that was the reason I stepped down. It wasn't like I was pushed out or anything like that, but yeah, I did step down for that. But it was 2 years. I was appointed a year, and then the next year I had to decide to run or not, which I honestly wasn't going to. But a lot of a lot of discussions and things. Anyways, I did, and then the following year I was actually the elected mayor. Um, but then I just recently stepped down. And again, I want to jump back to through all of that. My history kept getting put out. Oh, here comes a mayor. As a matter of fact, I'll remember the first city council meeting as mayor. There was a fella sitting out in the auditorium, and he had a picture of the city manager with thief under her name, and then a picture of me with thief under my name. And I was going to call him out for being creative because I thought that was pretty creative. The city's ran by two thieves type of a thing, but he left before I could. But so my history every time it comes out, especially when I was appointed mayor and they bring my drug history out, then it was in the news. Like, it was, my brother lives up in Washington, and it was in their TV news. Ex drug addict, now mayor of Brookings, Oregon, type of a thing. Um, but again, that was another opportunity for me the following meeting to address it. And I took time, about 20 minutes at the end of the meeting, to really state it. I can't tell you, probably, well, I don't know the number, but between texts, emails, news stations, the people that responded to my response, it was great. And it's sort of what you're talking about. It was like, okay, there's more to this, and people are not what they used to be. They're we can change for the better. And that was sort of what I expressed, although very transparent about who I had been. But this is where we are now, and this is what I plan to do. And by the way, we're moving forward. And now and if you want to talk to me about this, if you have problems, if you need my input, I am an open book, and I am happy to help, and I will help. But otherwise, we have a job to do, and that's the way my nursing is in an operations here. And when I talk to somebody here and they have a problem, I first to bring up my history or a like problem maybe that they're having, but now we need to figure out next steps. What are we going to do? And move forward.
All right, that's really good. So again, Isaac, I want to thank you for being vulnerable and sharing your story. And for those listening, there is help and there's hope. And if you feel like you're struggling or you know someone's struggling, reach out to your resources. Don't be afraid to ask for help. And also be courageous enough to say, I need help. I need
And
help.
if you have people that want to talk to me about that, they're in a bad spot or whatever, you can feel free to contact or connect me with them. Um,
Okay.
that's one of my life's sort of now passions with where I am, and I've been able to speak at a local nursing school, and I've been able to speak at some other places. But you know, um, those are great. That's fine. That's fun to do. But I think the most benefit comes from having a good one-on-one discussion with somebody if they need it.
Well, Isaac, thank you for sharing your story. Appreciate all that you do. I'm so proud to say that you're a nurse and a mayor. And shifties. Remember, if you have questions, you can reach out to me and I can get you in contact with Isaac. He said he's willing to have discussions, which thank you for that. But shifties, remember, your shift makes the difference. Keep shifting. Enjoying the shift? Help us reach more nurse leaders by rating and reviewing us on your podcast app. It takes just a minute, but makes a big impact. Search for The Shift, tap those stars, and share what you love. Your feedback shapes our future episodes and helps others discover us. Remember, rate, review, and amplify The Shift today.